Hello everybody and welcome to today's BFR event. Thank you all for attending. If you could stay on mute, keep your cameras off, that would be appreciated. Please do add any questions into the chat function, upvote any questions that resonate with you throughout the course of the presentation. We could just move on to the next slide. We'll start, shall we? So the agenda, as you can see, the BFR is the bulk of the agenda today, and that'll be led by Tom Hart. We'll follow that with some Q&A, so do please use the chat function to pop your questions in, and then we'll just do a what's coming next and an ESFA update at the end. So can I hand over to Tom, please?
Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the sort of like a summary presentation about the budget forecast return. So in the chat, as we speak, there should be a few kind of statements going in, and if you could like the one that best describes you. So whether this is your first time, you've got no idea what the BFR is, whether you've done it a little bit in the past, or you're kind of a seasoned veteran, if you like, where you've done several over the past few years. So if you can do that, that'll help us just sort of gauge kind of like the audience sort of experience level. So what we're going to cover in today's session. So we're going to talk a bit about what is the BFR, what is the budget forecast, then we're going to go into why we collect it, some details around this year's collection kind of windows and the sort of the periods that we're asking for, or what's new, so what have we added or changed for this year, a bit of a demo around the form, the guidance, and some details in there just to kind of help point out some kind of extra bits that we've added. Some best practice and some feedback that we've had from academies through kind of part of our kind of user acceptance testing and sort of general kind of feedback that we've had over the years. And then a Q&A section. So as part of that, if you've got any kind of questions that you want to ask, feel free to pop them into the chat. And then at the end, we'll deal with the most liked. And whilst we're going through, if the team can answer them, they will provide a little kind of comment in the chat as well. So moving on. Yep, do you want to go to the next slide? They're the questions that are going to go in the... So what is the BFR? So the BFR is a financial return. It's an unaudited one, so you don't need to get the auditors involved. And it's sort of structured in a sort of a management accounting type of return. So it's not like the accounts return or financial statements. This is largely talking about your cash movements, what you're planning to spend, what you have spent, with a variety of sort of breakdown. And it's split between a kind of an academic and a financial year. So the financial year is obviously from April to March, and the academic year is from September to August. So it's sort of each year is broken up into three boxes. And it covers 3 years, sort of 3 years in detail and 2 in summary. So the 3 years in detail are the previous year, the current year, and next year. And the 2 years in details are the following on 2 years. And it's split into sort of 4 main sections. So your revenue section, which covers all of your gag income, grants, other income, kind of self-generated stuff, all the way through to your kind of staff pay, utilities, all that kind of stuff. The capital, again, looks at grants, whether it's from kind of the DFE, ESFA, or from local authority or diocese. Any transfers to capital to help kind of a self-build, and any general kind of capital building work. The other data includes loans and investments, cash, pupil numbers, and then the final section is all about reserves, and that'll be the breakdown between whether you direct pool, whether you don't, and any sort of centrally held ones. So why do we collect the BFR? To be honest, we use it for loads of things. So the main thing from an academy trust perspective is that firstly, it's compliance for the handbook, and I think it's section 2, where basically you've got to provide us forecasts in a format that the department asks for about your trust. It provides us a risk-rich source of data to help us understand the sector. It helps us identify trends, any trusts that may need support in the future but don't right now, and it provides overall insights into what's going on. The BFR is a main source of kind of data that we use as part of the analysis, and we do really value this data. So how do we use this? We use it to mainly complete treasury returns, so that's called the supplementary, which essentially we've got to do a forecast for the 31st of March the following year. So the reason we split the return into kind of a financial and an academic year is so that we can do that. We also do this as part of kind of using the data for new funding, for new policies, for working with Treasury. So if there's any potential extra funds that we can use, we use the BFR to help provide insights, trend data, and rationale and evidence for why we need to do things. We also heavily use this data as part of our spending review, where we'll use this information to help kind of petition Treasury for the best settlement possible. And that's why we really do value this data. And we also use this data for a whole bunch of analysis that we do in the department. So whether that's from kind of policy formation, policy tests, to make sure that if we're thinking of something new, that we've really thought about it and we've modelled it based on the sector's information. And we also use it to understand the Academy Trust's intent. So what are your plans? What kind of growth factors, what kind of interests have you got that helps us kind of map this out? So in short, we use this an awful lot, from everything from dealing with other government departments and Treasury, number 10, to identifying a trust that doesn't need some support right now, but may do in the future, so we can try and get in there early to help avoid something becoming more complicated than it could do. So, move to the next slide, please. So yeah, this year's collection dates. So the form covers these sorts of timeframes. So as I said earlier, so we've got the historic one, so last year's data, where it will split between the financial and academic year. And we help to use this for the 22-23 financial year. You'll find that the first column's pre-populated for trust, so it's based on your previous year's data. The current year that you're in, which helps us prepare for next year's financial year returns. And then 23-24 academic year, which is in again the sort of the year on in detail, so your next academic year, and then in year 4 and 5, which is in summary only. So trusts who have to do this, so basically if your trust was active as of the 30th of April 2023, you're in scope, and you should have received emails already about this telling you that the return's ready and live and with some details about guidance. So this year, the deadline is the 31st of August. Usually it's the end of July, but this year we moved it out by a month. And we did this based on feedback from trusts from last year. Last year, the school teacher review body pay recommendations came out slightly later than expected, and it didn't give trusts a huge amount of time between the recommendations coming out and the deadline. So what we've done this year, based on feedback, is to extend the deadline further. So if there is again a slight delay, trusts have got a lot longer to consider the feedbacks and submit their data. And you can submit at any time through the collection window. You don't have to wait to the 31st of August to submit your return. As long as your trusts have worked with your governors and your trustees and you've gone through your finance boards, etc., you can make the return whenever you're comfortable with it. As long as you've made sure that you've given the budgets a really kind of comprehensive view, and you understand the assumptions that you've made, and you've made sure that you've taken a reasonable approach with it. So moving on to the assumptions. So we understand that even in a regular non-recession-ish year, setting a school budget is complicated. We get that. We know that, because it's a reflection of your educational plans, you know, your academic policies, all that kind of stuff, and that it is complicated. And trying to present that in a way that represents the forecast, again, we get it is complicated. We want trusts to understand around the teacher pay stuff that we can't give you an answer from this. And I know that many of you would want us to say you need to use X rate, but we simply can't. The current position is that we're waiting for the school teacher review body work to conclude, and that should be done next month. And at the moment, we can't advise what that is, and it ultimately Academy trusts can pay whatever rate they would like to, as long as it's affordable and it's reasonable. And again, on the assumptions, we can't advise on these because each trust is unique. Each trust, has their own circumstances. They've entered into their own contracts. For example, the utilities down in Cornwall are very different to the utility rates up in sort of Newcastle area, right, for instance. So we can't advise on these because we want the local views and the local sort of decision making made at each trust. So we can't sort of give you more details on this, I'm afraid. But however, what we can do is use our BFR guidance, where we've got a whole bunch of kind of detailed information around the school resource management links. We've got some advice around things you need to consider for income, for expenditure, including links to the energy discount scheme that's still valid for another few months. Some prompts about looking at kind of birth rates, local authority data, all that kind of stuff. And I'll show you that as part of the demo shortly. And I suppose the other option is to come up with a set of reasonable options, not just worst case, not just best case, but a reasonable kind of down the middle view. So, and part of doing that is engaging with your trustees, come up with some options around the sensitivity analysis of your trusts, because for what's affordable for one trust won't be affordable for another. And it's about making sure that for your trust you've presented information to your trustees around this kind of affordability, so that when they have got a set of options and decisions to make, they've got the best information to hand. And then plan the meetings in. So it could be that you want to have a series of meetings talking through the budgets. So pop them in the diaries. And I'm sure if you spoke to the trustees, whether it's done, in a Teams meeting or done through email, that was a really good way of getting, indicative kind of feedback from your governors around, what they view as a reasonable, so that they can understand. And then once you've gone through and you've worked up your budget, you know what the assumptions are, include them in the return. So if we're looking at your data and we think, oh, what's, that shows a dip or a change or something, in the assumptions section, which I'll show in the demo, if you include your broad assumptions of, we've assumed, pay rate of X, we've assumed a growth rate of this or whatever, that helps provide the context for your return. So when we're looking at it, we don't just see numbers, we see the context. That really helps us understand and, and make the best of your return. And ultimately, we know their forecasts, we know that they can change, right? We're not going to hold academies to the sword over this. What we want to understand is, what was your intent at the time, and making sure that your governors and your trustees and the management of your trust really understood that this was reasonable. So moving on. So what's new? So what's new this year? So in the form, which I'll show you shortly, we've added some extra help text as part of the feedback. We've made some of the text static, so it sort of sticks out. So you can't, do the little click to hide it, if that makes sense, because we know that some users miss that. We've pre-populated the opening balances for lines 410 and 670 based off your accounts return information. And we know that some trusts found it tricky calculating their brought forward balances. So what we've done is we've taken your AR data and we've pre-populated these two lines for you. And in the vast majority of instances, these lines were exactly, when we modeled it on last year's data, were exactly the same as what we pre-calculated. However, some were different, and we knew that some trusts found that a bit tricky. So what we've done is we've put this in this year's return. But however, if you disagree for whatever reason, that's fine. Just you can overtype it and you can correct it to whatever value that you believe is right. And this year we've included a new validation around GAG income and pupil numbers. So if there is a large GAG number and a small pupil number, so the ratio is too high, we'll ask for a reason of why it's like that. Because I'm sure there could be a very good reason, but again, it's the context that we're after here. And if a trust has made a typo, say you've rounded the pupil numbers, for instance, or you've not rounded the gag, it'll pop up straight away and show you that, this isn't quite right, have another look. And in 99 times out of 100, it will be, we've made a typo, that's fine, this will help stop it before it goes through further. And we've repositioned pupil numbers to the very start of the form, because this firstly helps with the validation, but also it's the kind of the real driver for why is your income what it is, why is your expenditure what it is because it's around the pupil numbers, because that's the sort of the main metric for your trust. So on to the demo. So technology permitting, let me just share my screen. Just give me 2 seconds. So hang on. Oops, sorry. Okay, so hopefully everyone can, Gemma, can you just confirm that you can see the screen?
Yes, we can see your
Okay,
screen,
perfect.
thank you.
Excellent. So sorry about that. So I'm going to start off on the guidance pages. So this is our main gov.uk guidance. So if you type into BFR into gov.uk or into Google, more likely, it'll bring you here. So this is the sort of the heart of the return. So you've got details around the deadline. You've got the login here, which I'll show you in a second. It breaks down the return in terms of the periods it's after, and it will give you access to the workbooks. And these are sort of an invaluable tool for preparing your return so you can work offline. And what you do is you simply click into it and it will give you the BFR form in an Excel format. So if you wanted to prepare and work off something offline, or if you wanted to think about it in between doing other things, you can prepare your numbers in here, and this is exactly a mirror image of the online form. And there's 2 formats you can use. There's the traditional one, which is essentially the long workbook with everything going down the page. And then you've got the multi-page one that mirrors the form identically. So page by page, this workbook mirrors the form. However, both will give you this exactly the same output, the same validations, just presented differently. Got a section here to tell you what to do if you've got an academy that's sort of leaving or joining you throughout the year, and what we would like you to do with it. We've got the power hour details here, and we've also got the sector calls. So each week, and you can see a big table here, we do 2 sector calls. So trusts or users or anyone can join, basically at the Teams meeting here at this time, and they'll be on for the half an hour, where we can talk you through your return. And, you know, depending on how busy it is, we will stay on way past the half an hour. As long as people have got questions, we will be happy to stay on. And in these calls, we will go through any specific questions about your return. Again, we can talk about the principles of assumptions with you, but obviously we can't advise, as I'd said. And we can also try and help out sort out some IDAMS queries again, because we know sometimes that can be a bit tricky. So we'll have people on the call who will help support with that. And if you've got a query and it's outside of these times, you've also got the old Academy questions form. If you click in here, it will take you directly to the help desk. And again, in terms of the guidance about actually using the detailed guide, if you click through, as you can see here, and here is the HTML. So basically, it just looks a lot nicer on the screen. You know, in detail guidance about how to use the form. Again, you've got the logins, you've got the structure of the form, who needs to do it, updates for this year, details around each of the GAG funding and stuff in, you know, in kind of exact detail. And then I'll go down to the forecasting and assumptions. So this is what I mentioned earlier. So here we've got some great links for the school resource management. So it kind of gives you the sort of link to other support to help trust as part of your kind of your managing your resources. You've got estates management guides, you've got buying guides and links how to create your own professionals network. And in terms of the narrative around the sort of the forecast, we've obviously got a lot more detail here, which I won't read through. But we've also got links through to view my financial insights and the school's benchmarking, which can help you kind of review and assess your trust's financial kind of standing against others. And we've got details here to the School Teachers Review Body and the Local Government Association for their pay detail, their latest pay details. But again, they're currently going through the process. We can't really discuss that in any more detail. And then in terms of factors which could affect income. So again, you know, talks about some kind of helpful prompts, you know, pupil numbers, local trends, you know, national funding formulas, revenue allocations, you know, all this kind of stuff down here that helps you then think about your return and what you needed to do in terms of, you know, have you covered all bases? And then in terms of details of the forms, so we've got these sort of quick links here. So if you had some, say, a query around DfE ESFA income, each line in here is represented as part of line numbers in here. So what was line 105, and in here 105 startup grants. So you can see clearly through either doing a Control F, so you can search for something on the page if you've got a query about it, and we've got a bit more detail here about the sorts of the sections. So every single box throughout the BFR is included in this HTML guide with extra sort of details and extra sort of content. And then in what's new for this year, in the scenarios, we've added some more details around the GAG funding statements. What do you do if you GAG pool? And some calculations of how we worked out line 410. So you can see here we've taken some notes from the accounts return. So what was an example accounts return and how we generated the number that we've generated in the details. So you've got bits of the balance sheet, and it's sort of a worked example showing you all the way through. And again, with 670, the worked example of how we calculated this number, so you can reverse engineer it if you wanted to know. And we've also included an extra scenario looking at gains and losses on the endowments. And these examples here have come down from the Academy Accounts Direction Model accounts, so using Coketown. So again, we've really worked this through based on user feedback around, we had a couple of questions last year about endowments, so we thought, well, we'll do a worked example to show you how you need to adjust it. And then at the end, a glossary of terms to help kind of demystify some of the terminology that we use in the form. So moving on to the return. So again, this is actually production. So if I'd have gone to if I'd have gone and clicked here to go to the login, it would have led me to this page that I've logged in, and then this is a tile page that you'll see, but this is just using our kind of dummy Coketown Academy. So when you log in, you'll see budget forecast return 2023, and simply click through, and it will take you to your dashboard, and it will tell you at the top the UPIN you've used, and the trust, and then the role you've got, and then the email address that you've used to sort of help log in. So the return's broken down into sort of three main sections. So sort of the before you get going in terms of with the finance details, filling in the finance numbers, and then the submission of your form. So whether you're an approver or a preparer, there's a sort of a summary section here. And so you can see, because I've not done all of this section, don't worry, I'm not going to make you sit and watch me type through all this, but as we've not done all of this sections can't start. So it's really kind of nice and straightforward of, you work through section 1, then 2, then 3. So moving into the introduction page. So this is basically a summary of, if we needed to contact you about something, what's your name, what's your phone number, and an email. And as part of this trust, there is 5 academies within it, but hypothetically one was to have left. You would note down what's included within your return, and if the information isn't correct, you put no. Say example, we're missing an academy, or one's joined now or later or whatever. You can hit the no button and then type in your message, and then you can carry on with your return, because we don't want to stop you kind of processing through. And then once you're happy with the page, you hit mark as complete and you hit next. And some trusts have external preparers who will help them with this. This is if you've got, say, an audit firm and you've contracted them to do all of your forms. So here is the provision for you to enter the details here. But if you don't have any, you just literally say you don't have any, mark as complete and go to next. And then the finance questions. So because we'd only want you to fill in the bits of detail that are actually relevant to you. So if you don't have any loans, you've not got any investments, you don't have any overdrafts and no provisions, you won't have to fill in these sections of the forms. But if you do have them, it'll either be forced as a yes because you've got previous data in there, or if you don't have any, you just simply say no. So clicking through. So the first section here, as I said earlier, is around pupil numbers. And as you can see here on this page, you've got the sort of the section title, you've got the status, and you've also got this blue box here, which will appear on every page. And if you're unsure about this section, what you do is you hit this, and it will take you to the relevant section in our HTML guide. So if you're not sure, hit this kind of blue box up here, and it'll direct you to the relevant section in our HTML guidance. So in pupil numbers, so this is the number of pupils that you think you've got. It's not rounded, so this is in whole numbers. It's what I prepared earlier. And then you hit next, and it will take you through to the next section of the form. So just a quick reminder that all information is in rounded thousands, so don't enter in pounds. So in the example that you've got here, if you have 100,000, you enter 100, not 100,000, because then that would be 1,000 million. No, 100 million, sorry. And in terms of the form, you can see here, we've got all of the DFE ESFA income section. So you've got all of the lines. So if I show you the Excel workbook, it is an exact mirror of here. So if you are preparing using this, it will look exactly the same as on the form. And all the validations will work exactly the same, as will all the calculations. So for trusts who've done this before, this first column, this one here will be filled in for you using last year's data. But because this is a dummy account, we haven't got previous data, so this is how it'll look for us. And you can see that you've got this sort of September to March, and then the total figure. So for instance, say, I don't know, you had pupil premium for some reason, if you didn't have any between September and March, but you knew you were going to get 10,000 between April and August, you would enter 10 at the end. And then if it was the other way around, say you were going to get, say, 10 at the start, none in the middle, and you were going to have 10 at the end, it would show you, you'd enter the sort of the breakdown of the calculations like that. So you can flex the 5 and 7/12 split depending on when the funding or expenditure was going to happen. And earlier when I mentioned about some of the help text staying static, you can see here, for example, 105, that's been pushed open, but 108 hasn't. And if you see any arrows like this, you simply just click it, or if you're unsure, and again, if you're unsure with anything on here, you click this and it'll take you to the exact section of the guidance for more details. And what you need to do is you will need to provide the breakdown of the split between the sort of the September to March and then the total number. So if there's, if you're going to get money in this period, you'd enter in here and 0 there, or vice versa. And it's essentially you work your way through all the income lines from DFE ESFA. And once you've got to the end of that, you'd hit mark as complete. And you can see at the bottom, you've got a sort of subtotal so you make sure that you're kind of happy with the breakdown. Then you would look at other revenue income. So example, local authority, government grants, trading income, if there's any kind of sort of endowments or any other bits of kind of investment stuff through here. And then you just work your way through the revenue section. So and if you've got any kind of, for academies joining or leaving you, the kind of the revenue surplus, if that makes sense, and how to adjust for that. Then costs, so staff costs. So you have a breakdown of all of the staff costs split between the months, the split between pension cost of teaching for non-staff, pension cost for teaching staff and pension costs for non-teaching staff. And again, it'll give you a subtotal here. and then the other non-staff costs. So again, essentially other non-staff costs, which is basically anything other than staffing, and if it's not, other support costs would go in here. So we try and not ask for too much detail to try and reduce the burden. And once you've gone through all of this sort of revenue section, you'll come to the revenues total page. And again, as I mentioned, so this number here we would have pre-populated, and if I just bring you back to the the examples here, so the revenue totals. So this is a calculation of how we've pre-populated this in your form for you. But if you disagreed with it, you just simply would type it over with whatever you thought it should be, and then that's that, and then that's the brought forward balance to make sure that the totals that you've got above kind of carry forwards with an accurate basis. And if your trust has a balance, so when we get down here, so if this revenue balance carried forward is larger than 20% of your income, you will need to complete the reserve balance detail. So this is only if it's over 20%. And this will break down in more detail around what the purpose of the balance is for. And if it's, say, for example, a special project or some work that you're going to have done in the future, it just provides us with a bit of info so we can kind of understand that. And we've got a report separately to PAC on that. So once you've gone through the whole return, and once you say you get to a section, you need to say mark as complete and it's done, you can either just hit home and then sign out. And as you go through each of these sections, repeat. And once all these say completed, you'll get to the summary declaration part, which is a simple click through. It will just replay the information to you to say these are the totals. Do you agree? Are they fine? And you put them in the right kind of units. And if you're a preparer, you would go through to give your declaration ready for your approver to review it. And if you're an approver, you can also prepare. So this section here, if I'd have gone through all of this, I could jump back to the approver section, go through my declarations, and then you could submit it to DFE. And as you're going, if you want to click, oh, what's my return looking like so far, you can hit the Excel button here on the right, hit downloads, and then it will give you the return as it is standing. So in terms of, so you can see here, I had 1,000 for the pupil numbers, and this, it just basically, well, if you'd have filled it up in more detail, it would be all here, but this gives you a breakdown exactly of everything you've entered into the form. And this again is the same format that we've used previously. So if you had reports previously using this, it's all there for you. And then the 3-year forecast section, which is the next bit. So these sections here, so these few, all cover in detail. The 3-year forecast section is in summary. And again, it's split into the same kind of 4 lines of revenue, capital, other items and reserves. Because the 23-24 is done in detail, we've summarized this up for you. So you can see from here, this is based on the information that I've entered into the form. But what we want you to do for 24, 25, 25, 26 is enter the summary lines here. And this is where, I don't want trusts to get too kind of concerned or bogged down in the detail of exactly what it's going to be. It is a broad brush, and we know that this is a forecast position. So if your trust is steady state, put in broadly an assumption of, I don't know, whatever your trust believes the funding rates is going to be. However, if your trust is seeking growth, or you want to grow as a trust, you're ambitious, or if your trust is, going to lose some academies, this is the section that you can estimate your assumptions around the scale and what's likely to happen. And earlier, as part of the assumptions section in the presentation, I mentioned about providing your assumptions. So this box has got 2,000 characters, so that's roughly 2 sides of A4, where you can talk about your assumptions that you've made as part of your return. So in terms of the income, again, if you've assumed steady state, or I don't know, a 2% increase or whatever, put this down. And the same goes with the expenditure assumptions as well. So if you've assumed a certain pay award rate, or you're planning to do something different, or you've assumed certain kind of conditions, enter the details in here. And again, this is 2,000 characters, so again, that's a fair amount of detail. Then you just work your way through each of the sections. So revenue, then the capital, other items. And the reason we ask for depreciation, which I know some trusts may find slightly strange, is because part of our control totals that we have to use with Treasury asks us for this, and it's part of our budgets that we're held to is around depreciation. So again, if you're looking at your capital profile and you're thinking, oh, we might get rid of a building in a few years, or we've got no real plans, and if it's a straight line approach, then that's fine. Apply the same proportion of your depreciation rate through here. And again, for the pupil numbers, if your trust is thinking, well, it's roughly going to be steady state, it's going to be about 1,000, great. If you're thinking you're growing, or you might get some new, or you're looking to get some new schools to join your trust, enter in some estimates here. And this is all about kind of understanding the context. So if we look through and see, your profile is looking like a certain way, and we're looking at the pupil numbers and we're thinking, that's gone up, that's they're anticipating some growth, brilliant. This is what this helps provide the context for us. And again, for the reserves, this is basically a recap around what your reserves brought forward were, what the carry forward, the subtotal of other lines of here, and that's the end of this section. So I think that's it for the demo. So if I stop sharing, can someone take control of the slides, please? Excellent. So just to summarize, so best practice and feedback. So really is, read the web page, look at the ESFA updates, look at the workbooks, because they mirror the form exactly, and you can play around with them as much as you like in terms of planning of your assumptions, and use it as a real kind of live document as part of your preparations. If you're unsure, join the sector call. We don't bite. We're happy to have a conversation and get feedback from you. So we'll ask you questions as well about what you think, getting your feedback, because obviously we want to make this as good a process as possible, and part of that is having a good dialogue. Look at the school resource management webpage. You can find them in the BFR guidance, but again, just type that into Google, ESFA school resource management, and again, you'll find lots of kind of really good support and wraparound around the other side of running a trust. And check to see who can access your form. Have you had any new starters or leavers in the year, or people who used to do it but you've not done this yet? Have a look through to make sure the right people have got the right access. And again, engagement with trustees. Put some things in diaries, send out some emails, look at some assumptions, try and get their kind of feedback and understand what their kind of perspective is. And if they don't know, come up with some affordable assumptions, looking at your sensitivity analysis about what the trust can afford, and use that as a starter for 10. If that doesn't work for them, then again, use that to the approach of what is affordable with the forecasts. And again, feedback. If you like something, tell us. If you don't like something, give us some feedback about how we can help you better. So whether that could be through one of the sector calls, one of the academy question queries, we're happy to hear from you. And again, once you've done the return, you'll be sent a sort of a completion survey where you can tell us, in detail about feedback about all the relevant sections. You can put in as much effort as you want, or you can literally just click through in a few clicks and then you're done. Because that will help inform future developments and the future approaches for the form. So if I pause there, should we go through to questions? I will try my best to answer some. So, published. So if I scroll down the bottom, so if I go to the most liked, which is from Alison. So RE assumptions, whilst I realise there are factors the DfE doesn't control, like individual trust energy costs, which will depend on contract end dates, the DfE does control GAG funding. So would it be very useful to have guidance on GAG for 2 to 3 years? The minimum pupil level, which is increased basic factors. Okay. So in terms of future year GAG funding, again, as I said earlier, it's about, I know that we only give out a year's worth of funding advice, but again, this is all, I think what's the best way to describe this? The funding is based on the assumption, just a bit of a tricky one, this one. Do we have any colleagues on about GAG funding who could, Gavin, would you mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we hear a lot, obviously, and I do appreciate that, you know, obviously multi-year funding information would be immensely helpful, and as you're putting your budgets together, you know, as you move into the future, as you look to the future, it becomes less and less more and more difficult rather to kind of predict. So it's something we hear a lot at the moment because of the way the funding works and the budgets work in terms of government budgets. It's just something that's really difficult for us to do, but it's something we're continuing to kind of pursue. We've been leading some work on financial simplification, trying to make things like the Academy Trust Handbook a lot simpler, and we've heard a lot about this through that process as well. So it's something we'll continue to look at, but I think as sort of alluded to, the difficulty is knowing what the financial picture is going to be, the financial step, and what's going to be for future years, which makes it more difficult to do.
Thank you, Gavin. So the next comment I'll take goes to Stuart Ash. The deadline extension is helpful as it allows more time to complete the BFR. However, trustees meetings are set typically a year in advance. I mean, I know that some trusts have said that it's not as helpful as it could be. Other trusts have said, yes, it's fine. I suppose part of what we're saying is, yes, we know some trustee meetings are dealt with in advance, but what our kind of our intention was use of potential kind of, you know, feedback via correspondence rather than having potentially a meeting, and that it's just about kind of providing some options through to give you a starter for 10 on looking at kind of prepping your budget. And I fully appreciate that, as I said before, you don't have to wait to the 31st of August to submit your return. As long as your trustees have met, you've gone through, you know, an approach to make sure whatever you are forecasting, you know, meets the reasonable test. So not worst case, not best case, you know, reasonable. And your assumptions are all noted and understood by trustees, then I fully appreciate that the reality is the vast majority will be done in July. But, you know, we just wanted to act on sort of feedback that we had about last year's dates and the STRB stuff coming out slightly later than planned. So the next one is there a line for contribution from reserves? As expected, most trusts will need to utilise reserves to reduce significant deficits. So in terms of you don't need to use the form as such, because you don't need to do anything special in the form. You would just need to show that if you have reserves and you are spending more than you've got in income for this year, so you're creating a sort of, you know, an in-year kind of deficit, if you like, the form will adjust for that, if that makes sense, because of the brought forward balances. So that's why we're really keen on making sure that the line 410 is reflective from your accounts return, so your audited accounts return. So you don't need to do anything special as part of it. You just need to show that if you've got more expenditure than income in the year, that the brought forward will help reflect the use of reserves. So moving up, why do you need last year's data when it's all in the AAR? So the Academy accounts return isn't done in a management account style. So there's a whole bunch of non-cash stuff. For example, you know, there's the FRS 102 adjustments, which is non-cash. And what we need to do for Treasury is use a cash basis for what are we going to do with our revenue allocation of funding, our capital allocation of funding, and we've got work underway, as Sam's mentioned, but currently there isn't an exact match. And if, as part of the modelling that we've done, and we've done this, trying to crack this for several years, but we can talk about this maybe another time, is the plans for this. But that's why we ask for last year's data, because otherwise we'll have a mismatch of data sources. So Anonymous has asked, how can you compare all this information when academies will be using different assumptions? Wouldn't it make sense to provide some assumptions, i.e. salary increases at all accounts, so it can be consistent? Well, the problem is not every academy is exactly the same. A large trust in the north will be different to a large trust in the south. And we want to understand the intent, and what would be affordable for some trusts certainly wouldn't be for others. So that's why we ask you for each of your individual assumptions, because otherwise it then doesn't become our forecast. It doesn't be, sorry, it's not, it doesn't become you. It isn't your forecast, it becomes our forecasts. And we need academies to understand what they are, what their assumptions are, because we can't make that for you. So Anonymous says, is there a map for the line numbers and the chart of accounts? So yes, so on gov.uk there is a chart of accounts webpage, and in that there is a large document that has some mapping details where it will show you the granular chart of accounts code. It will show you the accounts return, but on the very right hand side of the tab it will show you the BFR line number that it maps to. So yes, there is, and we are, as part of the, when I mentioned about the accounts return, this is part of the work that we are looking at in the longer term. So I think, how are we doing for time, Gemma?
Another couple of minutes, Tom, and then we'll need to wrap up. Thanks.
Okay. So there's a question from Heather about pupil numbers. So as a primary school, do you want the numbers to match your estimated GAG, or do you want us to include nursery numbers? If we include nursery numbers, so it basically, yeah, so as Sam has mentioned, it's all about the numbers of pupils that you're funded for. And I suppose as part of a primary, you would have to look and consider sort of LA birth rates and details like that. And again, this is all part of a forecast, so it doesn't have to be exactly, you know, spot on, because we know, you know, there's an element of parental choice, and, you know, it's what is your kind of broad understanding of what is it you're likely to be at. So we got a question from Stacey. Can the spreadsheet be uploaded? No, unfortunately you can't, because of essentially how complicated it is, and the validations, and the sort of the process, and what we need to then do with the data. So you've got to use the online form. But once you've got all the information signed off, I know we've had some trusts provide us some kind of anecdotal feedback of it takes about half an hour to key in all the information, because once you start at the top, you can just use the tab button to scroll all the way across and enter the data in there. So it is quite quick. So
sorry. Hello, Tom. I was just going to guide you on a few questions, okay. If you'd finished answering that one. So we've had absolutely loads of questions, so thanks very much, everyone. There were a whole cluster, different permutations around trusts coming into a MAT and trusts leaving a MAT at various points in the year. So because there are lots of different permutations, perhaps rather than getting into the specifics of any one of them, is there a particular place where that guidance is captured, or any kind of guiding principles?
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, so on our gov.uk page, if I can take over the screen a second, I will show you. So, oops, give me 1 second. Oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Right, so I'm presenting now, so apologies about that slight delay. So if you've got academies joining or leaving your trust, so we have a table here that shows you all around the in-year transfers. So it gives a kind of a rough period of transfer and what you need to do if an academy leaves the trust, what you need to do if an academy is going to join the trust. And again, if you know this is something that's going to be in the future, you know, broad, a kind of a broad best estimate approach is fine. However, if it's in year, then obviously, you know, in the detail section, then try and include more details around that. But if you know it's going to happen in, say, a year and a half's time or something, then, you know, your best forecast of the financial impact that's going to have on your, you know, the absorbing trust, then that's fine. As again, it's just about the kind of understanding the intent and the context of what's going to happen. And on the form, if you were to use the introduction section, so example of the academies that, you know, we think that your trust has got in it based on the 30th of April. But if you know, this isn't right because, you know, such and such is missing, or this has happened, or whatever, or we've included extra stuff, again, include the details in here as part of your form. So this will help provide the extra context. So if we're looking at your data and we're thinking, oh, there's quite a big step change, or, you know, you've got 1,000 more pupils in your forecast. If you use this section here to say, you know, such and such a schools joined on this day, you know, a few schools have joined on this date or whatever, then you can provide the sort of the summary details in here. And it could also be the other way around. So if your trust is losing some schools for whatever reason, you could include the details around when that's going to happen or what's happened, just for the context. So if I pause there and if I hand back to Gemma, because I think I've run to time.
Thanks, Tom. That was an excellent session. Thank you to the team as well. We have got a survey, a feedback form that's going into the chat. So please do take a couple of minutes to tell us what you thought. It really does help shape our future events. Speaking of future events, coming next month, we have the Counter Fraud Power Hour session on the 5th of July, 3 till 4. You can sign up now for that event. We may, Gavin touched on this, we may have a session regarding the Academy Trust Handbook and Simplification process in July. We'll let you know nearer the time though, otherwise that might come a little later in the year. Should we move on to a quick update on the LGPS? So the scheme has been extended to cover outsourcing services, and I believe it will provide cover to employees who were previously excluded. But there is a link there. Please do read that paper. It's really helpful. We also have, I think we have Daniel Tovey on the call to talk, to give us a little update on the benchmarking and VMFI merging. Is that right? There he is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can talk to that very briefly.
Thanks.
If we've got time. So yes, some of you might remember I came to speak to a Power Hour about a month or two ago, I think, and I was talking about a few of my financial insights and trying to do a bit of a demo of how it all works. Oh good, window cleaners just turned up. That won't be distracting at all. So essentially we're about to kick off a large user research, and we're trying to look at how to improve the benchmarking service. Frankly, we've had a bit of feedback quite persistently since we formed the service about the fact that it's a bit confusing to have two services, View My Financial Insights and the school's financial benchmarking service, sitting in the same place. And so what we're aiming to do is speak to as many people as possible before the summer holidays kick off, really, and work out what we could do to bring the services together, to consolidate, to make things all a bit simpler. So really, this is just an appeal. I'm going to put an email address in the chat to try and get some response from you guys. If you really like the service, it would be nice to hear from you, mostly for my own self-esteem and performance management. But the people we really want to hear from are those of you who do not like using the VMFI service or the school's financial benchmarking service, because you are the people that will give us the guidance on how to make it better. So just a really big appeal. If you think you'll have a bit of time to talk to us about benchmarking over the next couple of months, please do reach out. And as I say, I will whack an email address in here, and I'll ask the team to forward you the email address as well that we use. I think back to you, Gemma.
Thanks, Daniel. Just one other quick update, just to say the VAT presentation is now ready. We had some IT issues last month. For those of you that are regulars to the Power Hours, you'll know that we had some issues, hence moving to Teams Live. But that presentation is now available this week, so that will be being sent out to you all as well. Thank you all so much for attending today. Thank you to the speakers, and I will give you 5 minutes of your day back. Thanks very much, everyone.